Did you know that interviewing with your potential skip lead, that's your potential manager's manager, is becoming more and more common when trying to land a new position? Let's dive right into how you should prepare to crush this type of interview. Item one is logistics. So let's quickly address a couple of logistical items. First, in almost all cases, this interview is going to be last. Why? Because the organization is not going to waste a skip lead's time with a candidate that they are not very seriously considering. And this is good for you to know. You are not making it to this step randomly. You're getting this interview because they like you. And it's either a part of their process, something that specific skip lead prefers, and or they're just using this interview as a make or break interview. Second is time. Almost always these are short interviews, typically a half an hour or less. Now they could be in person, via phone, via video, but keep in mind the short time when preparing. And with these two logistical items in mind, let's move on to item two, which is really knowing your audience. And this all starts with your point of contact. Whether your POC is a recruiter or hiring manager, it's a really good idea to probe and probe heavily with a ton of questions before this interview. And for the sake of this video, let's just assume that the skip lead's name is Sue. So always start with a couple of broader questions about the reasoning slash purpose for meeting with Sue. So we might start with something like, what is Sue's primary goal when she interviews candidates like me? Then we can start diving in a little bit more into Sue's style and approach. For instance, how does Sue typically conduct her interviews? Is it more formal or conversational? And in correlation, does she prefer a more structured interview format or more of a free flowing discussion conversation? Now, these two questions are very similar, but we want to figure out these items to know how to best prepare. Then we're going to dive a little bit deeper. What types of questions does Sue usually ask during her interviews? Are they more behavioral, hypothetical, technical, all three? And are there specific areas or themes that Sue tends to focus on in these interviews, such as leadership, problem solving, conflict resolution, etc.? Does she prioritize discussing certain types of skills or attributes as well? And now that we have an even better idea of how to prepare at a high level, let's go one step further into what Sue actually expects in the answers. Overall, does she like a more casual or formal approach? Does she value a lot of detail in my answers or focuses more on me being concise? Now, does she have a tendency to probe or dive deeper? Or is she really agenda driven and she just likes to get all of her questions answered? And now that we have a little bit more information on her approach, let's learn a little bit more about what we need to focus in on specifically. So, again, I want to come back to the qualities and attributes. That's definitely an area that we're going to want to double down on. And then we're going to flip the coin and say, hey, are there any areas that we absolutely want to avoid? Lastly, as it correlates to the overall, is Sue more concerned with fulfilling the specific role or finding a great fit for the company? Now, lastly, and I know that this is a ton of questions, but this is really going to prepare us, and that's the goal of this video. Do you have any general tips or advice for making a positive impression during this interview with Sue? And are there any common pitfalls or mistakes you see candidates making in conversations with Sue? And of course, we have to ask that catch all question. Anything I haven't asked, anything else you want to share with me that you think is important for me to know before this interview? This is a lot of questions, but this is going to set you up for success. And there are a million questions we can ask, but these are a bunch of questions that are going to be really, really important. Item three is themes and research. Of course, we have already done our research because that was part of our initial preparation for all the other interviews. So let's focus on two specific items. First, based on all the previous conversations, what have been the major themes that continue to come up as important slash the best way to have success in this role at this organization? And what have you found out about the specific product area and the short and long term goals of the team? Now, second, based on everything that you have learned throughout the process so far, can you do more research on what has shown up as themes and any additional guidance that was provided by your POC in that conversation with all those questions? In addition, one other small tip or trick is understanding industry trends. That can also be super valuable for a conversation with the skip lead. Item four, you know where we're going? Prep. So, no matter what you uncover in any of these first three areas, your interview prep will still be the most important. At this stage, knowing that this is a likely make or break interview. So you should be doubling down on all aspects of your prep, your behavioral examples, working through your hypothetical responses, specifically working on your preferred clarifying questions, frameworks, and pre planned assumptions, and then spending more time fine tuning and refreshing any domain specific or technical skills needed for the job. Regardless of what our POC tells us, we need to be ready for anything. And when preparing, I always recommend utilizing Gen AI. So I would simply copy and paste the job description into ChatGPT, for example, and ask it to create questions that it thinks a skip lead might ask you in that interview. And so it's going to take both the job and that leadership level into account. Lastly, oftentimes your ability to answer common questions in these interviews is more critical in this type of interview than any other. So, really fine tune and craft great short answers to tell me about yourself, why the company, why the role, etc. Item five, your questions. Of course, at the end of any interview, you are going to want to ask great questions. Interviews with skip leads can quickly, very quickly turn to your questions. Make sure that you have a minimum of 20 questions written down before this interview, and it's 100% okay to let your interviewer know that you have a list or created a list or that you're going to be reading off of a list. This shows both good preparation and organizational skills. So, where do we start? Ask about them. What do you love about the company? What do you love about your role? What do you love about the team? Get them talking about themselves and focus on positivity from the start. Then, a great follow up question after those three is, how can I help you? If I were to join the organization, how can I best help you have greater success in your role? This demonstrates that you're a great team player, demonstrating that you will be a valuable asset to the organization. Then you can pivot to more challenging questions that you have written down and your preferred Gen AI tool like GPT has created for you. The most important part is be super prepared with questions because it's easy. And not being prepared to ask questions, especially in this interview, will guarantee that you do not get the job. Item six is our final tip, which is default to listening. If the skip lead is doing most of the talking, great. Let them talk. Do not interrupt. The more they talk, the more they will like you. Active listening will always work in your favor when interviewing with a skip lead. I really hope this advice helps. Good luck.